After World War II, you've got more changes, okay? The biggest single change that's going to kind of lead to, immediate supranationalism is going to be nuclear bombs. All right, this is a bigger game changer than all the military weapons and industrial weapons and things that occurred prior to World War I, because this here is what really ended World War II. The United States was the only country that had the ability to use nuclear bombs. No one else had it. Other countries may have been working on the development of them at the time, but when we started dropping bombs on Japan, we were the only ones without power. That automatically puts us at a position that no one else in the world had ever seen at that point and was able to see at that point. We were the world's superpower and literally the only one. All right. Balance of power ceased to exist during this period, and the United States kind of just was what we were. Okay. Another thing about this that was kind of a big deal was this concept of globalization. Now, in human geography, I'm sure you've already talked about globalization. At this point, you've talked about globalization. And when we talk about it, I might have mentioned it a few sessions ago too in culture. The way that I always present this to my student is that there's three different types of globalization. And one is going to be cultural globalization. Economic globalization is probably the one that we are going to spend the most time looking at. And the third is this idea of political globalization. No matter how you slice it, globalization is a major game changer. It's going to be a huge reason why we look at supranationalism. The other thing is going to be the Cold War, which is a battle of ideologies. So when we talk about ideology, we're looking at, you might have heard people talk about the left or the right, the liberal left versus the conservative right. In the United States, it might be the leftist, the Democrats, and the conservative far right Republicans. I want to show you something about that in just a second. But here's the bottom line: is this: the United States, we represent democracy, a very, very liberal form of government. We like the idea of preserving the rights of people, giving people a say in their government. The Soviets, they weren't any of that. Okay, they were commies everywhere. Oh my gosh! And so we were at odds ideologically. And so once we defeated Germany and Japan, World War II was over with, there were issues on how we were going to handle reparations. But when the Soviets wanted to do their thing, we wanted to do our thing. And when I say we, it was more than just the United States and the West. In other words, the US, Great Britain, France, we all kind of saw eye to eye. The Soviets were like, no, we're not going to let you guys democratize everyone. We're going to also get in on this. And by the way, we want to establish communism. All right. So when we look at ideology, the United States and Soviet Union were allies during World War II because we hated Hitler collectively. Hitler was taking land from all over Europe and doing things really bad right then and there. So we wanted to fix him. And sometimes the enemy of your enemy is, or however that saying goes, So we had that one thing in common with Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union, and that was defeat Hitler. But if you look at this here is, I've heard it called a ideological matrix. Sometimes you might see ideologies represented on a timeline, but this right here is really a better way to understand what it is that we're really looking at here. Okay, let me show you. Bam. And by the way, this website is where this this chart comes from. It is actually a ideological quiz. You can go in here and type this in and figure out ideologically where on this chart you would be. It is a good way to figure out just maybe how Democrat or Republican you are. But here's the thing that you need to know is that this right here, as far up on the authoritarian as you can get, and as far left on the economics, that's Joseph Stalin. Over here, as far authoritarian as you can get, and as far right economically is going to be Hitler. That's the difference between those two. Here's the thing that we think about mostly when we think about these two leaders, and that is they are authoritarian. So what do I mean by that? When I talk about authoritarian, we're talking about someone that is a dictator. They control with an iron fist. They don't take no crap. and people have very, very little say in what's going to go on in government. The opposite of the authoritarian on this chart is going to be your libertarian, and what the further down that list you get towards libertarian, the more you just don't care about what people are going to do. Okay, so you might think in the United States, a very conservative, or maybe someone that might be up here might say stuff like, "We don't want gay marriage. We don't want to legalize weed." People down here are like, "Oh, you can marry whoever you want to and smoke whatever you want, and we don't care as long as you're not causing riots." All right. So that's kind of the difference between your authoritarian and your libertarian. When you look at the economic left, this is going to be your communism on the far left, meaning that everyone is a worker of the state. In other words, the state owns everything. People are going to be workers for the state. So everyone collectively shares in all of that. This is where the Soviets felt like everyone's going to be a worker. It doesn't really matter who you are. You work for the state, and the state owns everything collectively. Over here, the Nazis under Hitler, they didn't feel like that at all. On the far conservative right, they are nationalists. Okay, here's kind of the controversy. Whenever Donald Trump the other day said that he was a nationalist. All right, now he didn't mean he's a Nazi. That's how it might be interpreted. But what he meant, or what the Nazis would mean, or what you think about a nationalist in the Nazi sense, is they mean that Germans are better than other ethnic groups, and therefore should control everything having to do with the economy. So when you're looking at far-right nationalism economically, that means that there is one group that has all the power and control, and if you're not part of that group, you shouldn't have any of the power and control. That's kind of the difference here, okay? So everyone in the United States, everyone in the U.S. is going to be right here in this little black circle. All right. So when we think about someone like Donald Trump, he's going to probably be right here. Someone like President Obama is going to probably be somewhere like right here. Okay. Bernie Sanders might be slightly a little bit further left or wider, but I mean, for the most part, this is America. We don't have, I'm not saying that we don't have crazies. All right, we don't have a Nazi party in Congress. We don't have commies in Congress or any of that stuff. Okay, so that's the thing that I want you guys to know right off the bat, is that this here is where we're going to be. This is where Stalin was. This is where Hitler was. Okay, so the Cold War was a competition between the United States and the Soviets over who would impose what system where. Immediately after World War II, the United States and the USSR competed over reparations. This right here is Germany. It was divided between the West. In other words, the United States and their allies get Western Germany and can democratize it and make it however they want. And East Germany went to the Soviets, as well as all these Eastern countries that were going to be known as your satellite countries under the control of the Soviets. Now, this is Berlin, which is the capital of Germany. It was kind of like on a miniature scale, split between West, that was controlled by the West, and the East, which was controlled by Soviets. Now, I put this here as well because I want you to know this word enclave. West Berlin was an enclave. In other words, it was completely surrounded by essentially another country. Okay, so you can consider that to be an ethnic enclave. It caused a lot of problems too, because there was at one point where the Soviets actually blockaded that Western Berlin and prevented the United States and their allies from getting the food and aid that those people needed, because they were trying to pressure the West into giving it up. Churchill called the containment of the Soviet of Soviet communism, he called it the Iron Curtain. And this right here would represent your Iron Curtain. It was like a geographic area that represented the extent of where communism was at that time. And that's exactly where they wanted to keep it in the West. No more communist expansion. That's what we mean by Iron Curtain. Let's prevent them from spreading the system where the policy became known as containment, which I don't think I've got at my slide, but I would definitely take the time to write that down. All right. So that right there is a map of how the I guess alliances started to kind of take hold. Notice you've got three main colors here. You've got blue, you got red, and you got green. All right. So quick lesson. when you hear people talk about the third world, what are they talking about? Well, that is kind of like today's way of referring to LDCs, or your developing countries. Usually you talk about the third world, people are talking about Africa. Okay, yeah, you might have others that might be considered that, maybe South Asia or some of these countries, but usually you talk about third world, you're talking about your poorest of the poor countries. But that is not actually what the word means. Okay, what you're looking at here is the first, the second, what the heck is that? And the third world. Listen carefully. The blue, headed up by the United States, is the first world. Hashtag first world problems. It doesn't mean developed countries. It simply means those that allied with the West during the Cold War. The red is the second world. Hashtag you never hear about second world countries, do you? That's because there is no second world anymore. It fell with the Soviet Union. So the second world was going to be the communist states that were under the sphere of influence of the Soviets and the Chinese. You got a few others there in there. There's Cuba, okay? But this is your iron curtain. Notice the green countries here. Notice the green countries. The reason why they were part of the third world and they weren't part of the first and the second is because at the time, one, a lot of these countries were new countries that had just gotten out of colonialism. They were being controlled by the first and the second worlds. And another reason for this is because they are very, very poor. And in terms of globalization and picking sides in the I guess the near hot war, proxy wars that were going on between the Soviets and the U.S., these guys didn't really have a whole lot to say. So they were the ones that we were trying to protect from being communist, and they're the ones that the Soviets were trying to prevent from being democracy. So if you look over here, Afghanistan, Vietnam, according to this map, is actually part of the second world, and Korea. These are all some of the biggest places where we fought against, and here they are listed out, some of the places we fought against the Soviets through proxy wars. And when I talk about proxy war, it's kind of like what's going on in Syria right now. We're not actually on the ground fighting against the Soviets during these altercations, but we're funding people in Vietnam to fight against Soviets in Vietnam. We're funding South Korea to fight against North Korea. We're trying to overthrow Cuba. We're trying to help the Afghanis to liberate themselves from Soviet expansion. Okay, so at this point, because of the sheer military might of the United States and the USSR, countries sided with one or the other based on their ideology. And in other cases, both sides would go in and openly try to control countries in order to bring them to one side over the other. Okay, so the West, meaning Europe and the USA, were on one side, and the USSR, China, Yugoslavia, Cuba, and other satellite states and other communists were on the other side. And that brings us back to what we're looking at with supranationalism. Yes, I did just go a long time in the Cold War. You need to know all that stuff because it kind of leads into, in particular, this very issue, NATO and the Warsaw Pact.